floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Honor. I hate being alone. I hate you for all the lies. You don't love me. This is not love. Those were the words that Judy Church wrote in her notebooks that the police found while investigating the murder of Leroy Fowler. Leroy Fowler was Miss Church's boyfriend. They had been in a relationship for about 10 years. And some parts of the relationship were pretty good. They lived together at her house in Salisbury. They had purchased a home in Florida. They had some dogs that the defendant and the victim both really loved. Is it a notebook?
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, you've got the notebooks now. I usually have them distributed after the openings, but that's fine. If you choose to take, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Camelio. I didn't know they were going to have notebooks. If you choose to take notes, just bear in mind that your notes don't reflect evidence. Mr. Camelio, please continue.
As I said, some parts of that relationship looked pretty good. But that relationship was not a good relationship. It was a toxic, horrible, horrible relationship. The primary reason why that relationship was so bad was that Mr. Fowler had another girlfriend. Everybody knew that he had two girlfriends. Everybody accepted it, but I think it's fair to say neither of those two women were happy about it. Miss Church was not happy about it at all. You'll get the chance to read many of the entries that she put in her notebook describing the way she thought about this relationship. And this one that I just read to you, I hate being alone, I hate you for all the lies, is just a representation of these many, many diary entries and notebook entries that she put in both her written notebooks and in the notes section of her iPhone. She cataloged the things that he did to her that made her feel unvalued, unloved, unwanted. And it's easy to understand, in part, where Miss Church was coming from. Nobody wants to feel like they are not a primary person in their loved one's life. Nobody wants to know that when things get bad in your relationship, your partner leaves and goes to his other girlfriend. But that's what was going on, and that's what has been going on for years in this particular relationship. And that's what brought us here today. That's what caused the death of Mr. Fowler. On November 11th, 2022, it's actually Mr. Fowler's birthday. And that morning, the defendant, Ms. Church, called the police because Mr. Fowler was sick. He was in bad, bad shape. He was stumbling around the apartment. He couldn't stand up. He couldn't get his feet. He really couldn't talk or form any words. Every time he tried to pull himself up and get off the ground, he would fall back down. So after this went on for a couple of hours, Ms. Church called. Police called the ambulance, and they came, and they see the same things. They see the same things that are wrong with Mr. Fowler. She calls 911, and she says, my boyfriend must have ingested something. The first sign that you're going to hear that something was just a little bit off about this whole thing. Now, how does she know that he ingested something? He had all sorts of health problems. He had a pacemaker. He was complaining about illnesses leading up to this. But she immediately tells the police, immediately tells the EMTs that he must have ingested something. She's mostly not able to talk while they're there. They can't get him to stand up. They're holding him up to keep him from falling to the floor. Essentially, he's sitting on the floor. They have to hold him up. At some point, he asks about his dog. And at some point, he may have said something about some Percocets that he took. Now, he was no saint. We already said that he had another girlfriend. He used cocaine from time to time. But there's not going to be any evidence at all that Mr. Fowler wanted to harm himself, that he was in any way thinking of ending his life, that he had any thoughts of suicide. In fact, in the months leading up to his death, he was concerned about his health. He was trying to figure out what was wrong with him, and he thought maybe he had some sort of prostate cancer. So the EMTs are there. They're looking at him, and they don't know what's wrong with him. He can't talk to them. He can't tell them what's going on. He can't stand up. He's got no control over his limbs. He's combative. And they just don't know. They don't know what's wrong with him. So off he goes to Anna Jake's hospital, and they start running tests. They start taking blood. And honestly, at the beginning, they don't know what's wrong with him either. As it goes on, they start to think, he's been poisoned with antifreeze. He has antifreeze in his system. And that's the colloquial way that people talk about ethylene glycol poisoning. Ethylene glycol is a chemical that goes into antifreeze, and it is poisonous to people. Its metabolites, when your body breaks it down, causes your liver to stop, your kidneys to stop working, and then eventually can shut down your brain and kill you. You'll hear that those symptoms that I talked about at the beginning, the falling down, the unable to talk, the stomach pains, the groaning, you'll hear that those are all the first symptoms of ethylene glycol, antifreeze poisoning. Now, after he goes to Anna Jake's, they send him off to Mount Auburn in Cambridge, another hospital where they can provide a higher level, hopefully, of care. And you're going to hear from the doctor, one of the doctors who treated him at Mount Auburn, that all of the signs that she could see, all the signs that you're going to hear about, the medical terms, it's called an anion gap, an osmolar gap, some crystals that are forming in his urine. These are all signs of antifreeze poisoning, of ethylene glycol poisoning. On the 13th, November 13th, so this happened on the 11th, the 911 call, he goes to the hospital. On the 13th, Mr. Fowler dies. His brain just stops working as a result of these poisons that are coursing through his body. The police start their investigation. And you'll see that very quickly they focused on Miss Church as their suspect. They started talking to her. They realized that she had told different people different stories about what was going on with Mr. Church, Mr. Fowler, in the 24 hours leading up to his death. They had been planning on going to Florida, around that house again. Mr. Fowler was fine on that Thursday, the day before, November 10th. Didn't show any signs of ethylene glycol poisoning. And they start talking to family, they start talking to friends, they start looking at her notebooks, they get into her phone. And they find out that, in fact, Miss Church has threatened in the past to poison Mr. Fowler. In fact, the day that he goes to the hospital, the day that he goes to Mount Auburn, Miss Church told Mr. Fowler's sister, "Oh yeah, that's one of our jokes. I joke about poisoning him. I joke about poisoning his milkshakes." And that's important because the way that you poison somebody with antifreeze, with ethylene glycol, you put it in something sweet. Antifreeze is a sweet-tasting substance that can be hidden in sweet drinks. They keep looking. They find more. They find these stories, these diary entries, these notebook entries, where she talks about how bad their relationship is. She talks about how much she hates the other woman, a woman named Barbara Randall. And she refers to her repeatedly, both in her conversations with the police and in her notes and her notebooks, as the cunt. And I apologize for that word. It's so ugly, but it just shows you exactly what she was thinking about Ms. Randall, about the nature of their relationship. And you're going to have to read these and you're going to hear them. Some of them are vile. They really are, the way she talks about Ms. Randall. The police keep investigating, right? They go to her house on November 14th, the day after Mr. Fowler died, and they search that house. And among the items that they find is a Powerade bottle. Now, this is not the Powerade bottle that they found. This is just a representative of it, so I can show it to you. But Mr. Fowler loved his Powerade. He loved his sweet drinks. He loved his milkshakes. Loved his Diet Pepsi. He really had a horrible diet that appears to have consisted almost entirely of sugar. But they found a number of Powerade bottles. But one that they found, it just didn't look right. There was a little tiny bit at the bottom, right? A little bit of tiny liquid left, and it just wasn't quite the right color. So they take it, and it goes to the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab for some further testing. And they test it. They test it for fingerprints. They don't find any fingerprints. They test it for DNA. And what they find on the outside of the bottle is that they find Mr. Fowler's DNA, which you would expect if he drank from it. They found Miss Church's DNA on the outside of the bottle, which you might expect because it's her house, and maybe she bought it, maybe she put it in the fridge, maybe she threw it in the trash. But they also tested the mouth of the bottle. And on the mouth of the bottle, where you could only get your DNA by touching the mouth and taking off that cap, they find Mr. Fowler's DNA. They also find Miss Church's DNA on the mouth of the bottle. And why am I talking about a Powerade bottle? Because they then tested the liquid. They tested the liquid that was found inside, that little bit that was left over, and it had antifreeze in it. It had ethylene glycol. So that's going to be the murder weapon. That's the gun. That's the knife. That's the method used to kill Mr. Fowler. All the evidence that you're going to hear in this case about how Mr. Fowler died is going to be what I'm going to call circumstantial evidence. No one is going to stand up and say, I saw Miss Church put that ethylene glycol, I saw her put that antifreeze in the Powerade. That's not going to happen. No one's going to see, it's not a shooting or a stabbing where somebody can see what happens. It's all circumstantial evidence. It's all evidence that you're going to have to interpret and see what it means. And there's benefits to that, right? Sometimes it's great if you have somebody come in and say, yeah, I saw somebody shoot somebody, but you have to decide whether that witness is believable, right? But when it's circumstantial evidence, when it's the science, when it's the medical examiner coming in and saying, Mr. Fowler had ethylene glycol in his blood, when it's the chemist coming in and saying, Miss Church's DNA was on the mouth of the bottle, those aren't things that you need to discern, that's the evidence, right? That's what you need to interpret, not what you need to decide is true or false. Mr. Fowler had ethylene glycol in his blood when he died. He had ethylene glycol in his blood that morning when the 911 call was made. Miss Church was the only person who had access to him during the time frame that ethylene glycol would take effect on the body, about an hour to 12 hours after consumption. She was the only one who said, I'm poisoning him through his milkshakes, through his sweet drinks. She told another friend of the family at a bar that summer before his death, if he ever cheats on me, I'll poison him. The final thing that I want to talk to you about, and I left it for last because I sort of referenced it, but I told you that we know how Mr. Fowler was acting before that 911 call was made, that he was stumbling around the apartment, that he couldn't get his feet, he couldn't talk, he looks like he's in a lot of pain. Now that's important, one, because of the extreme atrocity and cruelty theory that the judge has talked to you about already. But it's most important because we know that evidence because as Mr. Fowler lay on the floor, moaning, trying to get up, whacking his head, bleeding in Miss Church's bedroom, she sat on the bed and she videotaped it with her iPhone. She videotaped him for a half an hour as he lay on the floor of her bedroom, dying from antifreeze poisoning. doesn't get up. She doesn't do anything to help him. She waits until he manages to choke out at the end, call 911, call an ambulance. She actually says that, and he goes, yes, yes. It's the only words he gets out on that entire 30 minutes of video. She shows him his unopened birthday, she shows the camera his unopened birthday presents, complains that he's tearing the room apart, and she's telling him, tell me what you took. Knowing full well that antifreeze that she gave him was coursing through his body, killing him as he lay there. You're going to hear from a number of witnesses during the course of this case. Some of them civilians who were friends with these two, some of them family, and some of them the scientists and police officers who investigated this case. At the end, I'm going to remind you about all the things that we've talked about here in the course of the openings. And I'm going to ask you to find Ms. Church guilty of murder in the first degree. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Camelio.